2 years back, Australian Prime Minister said that we are going to cut Australian migration in half. And when I read that, it scared me. Can you explain what does that mean, and is that where Australia is heading? There is this sentiment with a lot of people that getting a PR in Australia has become impossible. What do you have to say about that?
We have clients who have secured their permanent residency even in 2024 within 3 to 4 years of they entering the country.
If I'm new to Australia and suddenly people talk about subclass 190, 491, 190, 186, 482, these are just numbers. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
You know, people are like, oh, 491 is so much easier than 190. What does that even mean? You know what I mean? Can you explain how the point system works and how can we gather more points? Would you recommend someone to go for point tested visa or an employer sponsored visa? It is kind of crazy that we have never made content together. For your reference, we have been friends for almost over a decade, and we have worked together for a few years now. But Kunal lives in Canberra, I live in Adelaide, and that's why even though we work together, we talk literally every day, but we have never created content together. So I'm really excited for this podcast. In this podcast, we want to focus on everything regarding permanent residency. We hear a lot of myths in this industry, a lot of misinformation that people have. And what we want to do in this podcast is that anyone who goes through this podcast, at least they have basic information of how permanent residency work in Australia, and if somebody is aiming towards it, what are some basic steps that they can take. But before that, why don't you tell us about your journey or about your migration journey and what do you do now?
Thank you, Dave. I know it's really exciting to be doing this podcast with you. We have been working for almost like 4 years now, and I always had this question that why my co-founder doesn't want to make content with me. But yeah, today is the day. So yeah, hi guys, I'm Kunal Sitlani. I'm a registered migration agent in Australia. I started my journey in Australia in June 2017, and since July 2017, I've been working in this industry. So it was my first job working as an education consultant. It was pretty new for me. I started learning different things about the industry. Slowly and gradually, I got interested into the industry. I went into the deep how does education work, how does the migration work, how does the university admissions work. So initially I was more involved into the university admissions and student recruitment activities. Then I switched my focus to migration. I learned a lot about visas, how does visa work, how do students actually apply for post-study work visa, PR and those sort of visas. Then I got an opportunity to work with Australian National University when I moved to Canberra from Sydney. In 2022, then I decided to do my migration law program. And then, since last 2 years, we have been practicing immigration law. And we have working on 2 companies, Internash and Studynash with Dave. So that's a little brief about my journey in Australia.
I love that, dude. Just on that note, why? I mean, I have my reasons. I want to know your reasons as well. Why did you decide to do Studynash? Why did you decide to run a company?
That's actually really interesting. And when I was going through my life as an international student, or you can say as a migrant as well, and I worked with multiple consultants in Australia who have a global presence. I worked with a university. So many a times when you go into some social gatherings or community, and when you basically share that you're working for so and you're working in education and migration, students used to come and tell me that so and so person gave me this advice, or so and so person told me that take this pathway and this is good for you. And many a times I used to feel that the information is actually not correct. So I personally thought that, by getting into the business or by getting into this field, we can actually make this change. And I wanted to be that person by with the help of my contribution as well. We can bring some change into the industry, and I think that is my first motivation.
Nice.
to get into the business of education and migration consulting.
Love that, dude. Awesome. I'm not going to make everything sound great. I'm going to get it to the hard questions. I want you to be as honest as possible as well. 2 years back, Australian Prime Minister said that we are going to cut Australian migration in half. And when I read that, it scared me. And I didn't really know what it meant. Does it mean that we are not going to get permanent residency, like the people who are going to apply now? Or the numbers were also pretty crazy. So can you explain what does that mean, and is that where Australia is heading?
So I agree with your point that being a student or being a migrant, many of us or many of the students in the community actually took this news as a really big shock. If you see in terms of the numbers in 2022, the overall migration allocation was somewhere around 195,000. Then it was reduced to 190,000 in 2023. And then in 2024, 2025, this financial year, it's around 185,000. So when they said that the overall migration numbers are going to be reduced to half, that is, it included many other subclass visas as well, many other categories as well, because after COVID, Australia saw an influx of almost 0.5 million people in 2022 and 2023. So in terms of the government, in terms of the people who are making the policies, they were a little bit worried about this as well, because obviously a country who's letting migration to be somewhere around 200,000 and suddenly 500,000 people are coming, they have to plan the resources, they have to plan what are the next steps, how do they want to see the housing and everything. So they mentioned that as a industry point of view, not only specific to PR or work visas or student visas. And many students actually took that as a negative feedback or negative thing which is coming from their side. Right. If you see the numbers, it's not half. Okay. Now what is the planning which is coming for the next year? We have to wait and watch.
Yeah, because elections are coming.
Yeah, elections are coming. There are many other factors. Yeah. Immigration has always been a hot topic. Yeah. What is next? Yeah. And if you see in the last 6 to 8 months, there have been so many policies which have been changed, or currently they are working as well on that. Yeah. So migration is always an exciting field to have your eye on. Yeah. Because first, it's very important for the country. Second, the overall contribution it has to the Australian economy. At the GDP level, that is significant. Yeah, so
that makes sense.
And it impacts so many lives, like us,
including ours.
Including ours. Yeah.
Okay, another question, and this is something that I've asked a lot of people, is that there are people out there who haven't gotten their permanent residency for 8, 9, 10 years as well, right? And there is this sentiment with a lot of people that getting a PR in Australia has become impossible. What do you have to say about that?
I agree to disagree on that. Okay. I got my permanent residency in 4 years. Yeah. I came in 2017. I got my permanent residency in June 2021. Yeah. I got my visa grant in January 2022. So that was almost 4.5 years. Yeah. You also got your 491 within 4.5 years. Very similar. And during the time, it's not very it's I'm not talking about 2012 or 2010 as well.
Yeah.
We are talking about 2021,
Yeah.
2022.
Yeah.
So it's just like 2-3 years back. And when we see people, like as you said, like students or migrants who are not getting permanent residency, or they are not able to set their foot into the country for the last 9 to 10 years,
Yeah.
it majorly depends on what kind of steps an individual has to take. Many a times, what I have seen when I'm basically doing my initial assessments and doing my consultations, students and migrants actually don't know the right kind of pathway that they want to follow.
Okay.
They have been misguided.
Okay.
So initially there were certain loopholes, and people used to take advantage of the student visa program. One student visa after one student visa, and then again to keep on increasing. Then in between, COVID visas were also introduced.
Yeah.
So people also got a gateway of 3 to 4 years of being on a COVID visa. So that actually increased their overall duration of being in Australia. If you follow the steps in the right order, you are coming here as a student, you're doing your bachelor's, you're doing your master's, you know what occupation you have, what is possible for you after completing your qualification. I need to take my work visa. Okay, in the first year, I need to do this and this. We have clients who have secured their permanent residency even in 2024 within 3 to 4 years of they entering the country. So it majorly depends on how much dedicated you are to the process. Are you following the steps in the right way? Are you being guided in the right way? That is also very important. Because many a times, okay, someone is telling me, okay, I have to do this course. Okay, I'll do it. But what after that course? Is it going to help you in terms of permanent residency? It is going to give you a pathway. So there are a lot of factors that basically affect your overall journey.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I love the way you explained it, because obviously we have seen and we knew, you exactly knew what to do, when to do. And that had helped me of when to do, what to do, and we got the results that we got. So that's perfect. The next segment, what I want to do is talk about visas, right? What are some common visas? And I want you to explain, because if I am not from the industry, if I am new to Australia and suddenly people talk about subclass 190, 491, 190, 186, 482, these are just numbers, right? If I'm not from Australia, or like, I'm sitting in India looking at this video and people talk about these numbers, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, 491 is so much easier than 190. What does that even mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I want you to explain that. So if you had to differentiate different type of visas, at the end of the day, we want to get permanent residency, right? So let's stick to common visas that NRIs or a lot of people from subcontinent go for. What are those visas and how do you differentiate those?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's actually really important, because when you're planning about a certain country, or when you're a student, for an example, if you're sitting in India and then you're planning that I want to go to Australia, and what would be my next 5-6 years look like?
Yeah.
So generally speaking, it's like migrants who come to Australia, they start with a student visa. So student visa is basically subclass 500.
Okay.
Now subclass 500 is also like, are you applying for the vocational sector? Are you coming for diploma, advanced diploma level studies? Are you coming for higher education sector? Or are you coming for research or doctorate, PhD courses? So everything comes under 500 subclass. Then the students who come here to study, they progress to a temporary residency, which is also known as a post-study work visa, which is subclass 485.
Okay.
Now 485 also has different streams under 485. So it's a post higher education stream. So students who are completing undergraduate, master's level qualification, they will apply under higher education stream. Students who are studying trade courses, TAFE related courses, or diploma, advanced diploma related courses, they will apply for a graduate stream that is under 485. Now, 80 to 90% of the students and migrants who apply for this post-study work visa, that is the deciding time, 2 to 3 years or whatever they have got, depending on the studies that they have completed. This is the deciding time when you have to actually prepare yourself. You need to see that which permanent residency pathway that you will select in the future. Now, permanent residency, when it comes to permanent residency, there are 3 main visas, which are also known as point tested visas.
Okay.
Subclass 189, which is a skill independent visa.
Okay.
Subclass 190 and 491, they come under the category of state territory nominated visas.
Okay.
Now, when I talk about subclass 189 is basically managed by the Department of Home Affairs directly. So the federal government directly decides, sends an invitation, your profile is selected on the basis of your points. You don't have to be dependent on any state or territory for getting subclass 189. There are multiple rounds which happen in a financial year. So in the last 2-3 years, what I have noticed is Department of Home Affairs is doing couple of rounds in 1 year. This year they had rounds in September and November. Now the another state and territory nominated, that is subclass 190 and 491. Now subclass 190 is dependent to a respective state.
Okay.
Now there are 8 different states, 2 territories and 6 states. Now, for an example, I'm in Australian Capital Territory. If I want to apply for 190, I have to meet the eligibility criteria and the requirements of Australian Capital Territory.
Right.
So, Canberra Matrix. Canberra Matrix is the migration program in Canberra. So, I have to meet the eligibility criteria of that respective state.
Got it.
The state will give me 5 points as sponsorship.
For 190.
For 190, subclass 190.
Okay.
Now, if you meet the eligibility criteria, you're ticking all the boxes, Canberra ACT will basically nominate you for 190 and then you apply, which is a permanent residency visa, similar like 189. It's a permanent residency visa. But you have a moral obligation to stay in that respective state for a couple of years.
Got it.
Okay. Subclass 491. Now, subclass 491 was introduced somewhere around 2019 December. It was a very new program that time, just before COVID. Australia, as like the government was focusing more on regional town development. So they wanted people, not only the students and the migrants should focus on Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. They should also focus on the other cities, Adelaide, Canberra, Perth. There are some towns in Queensland, Cairns, then Wollongong, XYZ. So these territories also were the target for the government. They wanted people to migrate there. So they gave additional benefits to migrants.
Got it.
So in 491, the respective state or the territory gives you 15 points as sponsorship.
Right.
So in 491, it's a 5-year visa. It is a pathway to permanent residency.
Right.
It's not a permanent residency. After 3 years of you being in the regional area, you can apply for the permanent residency, which is subclass 191.
Got it. So that's great how you explain these 3 visas, right? But what I don't understand is that can anyone apply for these 3 visas as an international student? What are some basic eligibilities for these visas, and how do I know that I'm eligible for, let's say, 189 visa but not eligible for 491 or vice versa?
So in terms of the eligibility criteria, obviously subclass 189 has a different eligibility criteria, 190, 491, all the 3 visas are different. But when you see all the 3 visas are point tested visas.
Okay.
So an individual has to get points, has to reach a certain mark, so that the government or the state territory nominated authority will send you an invitation.
Okay.
But in terms of the basic eligibility criteria, you have to be under the age of 45.
Okay.
You have to have a positive skills assessment.
Okay.
Now that skill assessment will be decided on the basis of your particular occupation,
Okay.
which is mentioned on the occupation list.
Right.
Now Australia has an occupation list. There are 3 different categories in occupation list. MLT SSL, that is medium term and long term occupation list. STSOL, short term occupation list. ROL, regional occupation list.
Okay.
Now the people who are coming into the category of MLT SSL occupation list, they can apply for 189.
Okay.
The people who are in STSOL, they cannot apply for 189 because their occupation does not. So basically, the government has made that regulation. The occupation sitting under ROL and STSOL cannot become eligible for 189, which is the skill independent visa.
So that is why when I wanted to apply for permanent residency, I couldn't apply for 189. And that's why we found a state that had marketing occupation in their list.
Yes.
And that's when I applied for 491.
Yes.
Got
yes.
it.
That's completely, that's correct. So the federal government, the central has an occupation list. Every state and territory nominated authorities also have an occupation list. It depends if for a particular financial year that respective state wants to follow the central occupation list or they want to publish their own occupation list.
Okay.
So it's very important for an individual to actually go onto that platform
website.
Or the state's website and to see that if my occupation, for an example, I'm an engineer, civil engineer or a mechanical engineer, my occupation is currently open in that particular state or not. If it is open, what is the eligibility criteria? So subclass 189, you have to meet the eligibility criteria of Department of Home Affairs,
Got it.
the central government. You don't have to see any state or territory nominated. But when we talk about subclass 190 and 491, you have to initially meet the criteria of that respective state. So in your example, you met the criteria of South Australia as you're living in Adelaide. You met the criteria of South Australia first, and then we made sure that you're meeting the criteria of 491 Department of Home Affairs as well.
Got it.
So once someone if someone is staying in South Australia, for an example, and you have completed your qualification in South Australia, you are on your post-study work visa. You have an occupation which is currently open in South Australia. You're meeting the eligibility criteria of that respective state. So what we'll do is we'll put an expression of interest, which will go to Department of Home Affairs, and then we'll put a registration of interest, which will go to South Australia Migration.
Got it.
And if you meet the points, and if you have that, if you're at a level which South Australia feels, okay, I want this person on 85 or 90 points, send them an invitation. You get an invitation, you reply to that invitation, you get a nomination approval from that respective state. State informs the central government, okay, give them a approval, then we apply for the visa.
And
this
then
is how
we get the visa grant.
Yes, this is how basically the process works.
I love that. Yeah, you explain that in a way that people can understand. So that was really good. We also talked about points, right? That people get points, and then when you said 85, 90 points. So very quickly, can you explain how the point system works and how can we gather more points?
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting. Like Australia has been following the point system since last, I think, a decade almost. And there have been some talks going on that they want to make some changes in terms of the point system.
Yeah.
What's going to come next, we are not sure about that. But in terms of the different parameters which are considered when someone is thinking about migrating to Australia, age is a very important factor. The first and the foremost, age is a very important factor. So if you're between the age of 18 to 25, you will be allocated 25 points.
Okay.
If you're between the age of 25 and 33, you will be allocated 30 points. That's the highest. After the age of 33, the next bracket is 33 to 40.
Yeah.
You'll be given 25. And then after that, again, 5 points will be reduced. So it clearly, like, the messaging here is Australia needs people who are between the age of 25 and 33. So that's where the maximum points are.
Fair enough.
The second parameter in terms of points is what's your English language?
Okay.
If you have given an English language examination. Now, English language examination, the most popular and the most accepted ones are IELTS and PT academic.
Yeah.
So basically, do you have 6 bands? Do you have 7 bands? Do you have 8 bands?
Right.
6 bands, 0 points. 7 bands, 10 points. 8 bands and above, 20 points.
Got it.
That's how the points work. If you're nominating an occupation, so for example, you nominated marketing. Now, how many years of work experience do you have in marketing field overseas? If you have 3 years and above overseas, you get 5 points. 5 years and above, you get 10 points. 8 years and above, you get 15 points.
Right.
Overseas experience.
Okay.
The second is how many years of experience in your field in Australia? 1 year, 5 points. 3 years, 10 points. And 5 years, 15 points.
Got it.
Then comes to what is your highest level of qualification? Have you completed vocational studies, undergraduate, research or PhD, masters? What have you completed? So on the basis of that, you get points. Have you completed 2 years of study in Australia? You get 5 points for that.
Right.
If you have completed 2 years of university qualification or even vocational qualification, but that has been in a regional university. So for example, University of Adelaide.
Yeah.
So regional towns.
Yeah.
So if you have completed your qualification from there, you get 5 more points to study in a regional area.
Yeah.
There is also a language examination which is NATI.
Okay.
Now you can give that examination in like multiple languages.
Yeah.
You get 5 points for that if you have positively completed your examination.
So there are avenues where people can actually build up and get more points in order to get their permanent residence.
Yes. There are so many different parameters where an individual can target and try to attain more and more points.
Okay, perfect. So that's good, because a lot of times people are stuck at 65 points. They don't know how to get more points. So as if there is will, they'll find a way how to increase the points. Whether it's usually it's like their English is not up to the mark, and if they take enough classes, then they get 8 each, and then hopefully get 20 points, and their points would increase. Okay. One thing that I've heard is that Australian government is focusing a lot more on people getting employment and people getting employer-sponsored visas. So what is this employer-sponsored visas, and how true is that?
It's actually really interesting, the employer-sponsored visas. So as of now, if I talk about employer-sponsored visas, there's something as skills in demand visa, which was recently introduced, previously known as temporary skill shortage subclass 482.
Okay.
Now the name has changed into skills in demand visa subclass 482. Still, the name only has changed.
Okay.
Subclass 186, which is employer nomination scheme.
Okay.
Subclass 494, which is regional employer sponsored visa.
Okay.
So there are different pathways in terms of employer sponsored as well. Yes, I agree with your point that in the last 2 years, Australian government has been focusing into employment based visas, and they are actually encouraging employers across Australia to look for talents so that they can basically meet the skill shortages, mainly into regional areas, mainly into the towns where a lot of skills are actually very difficult to find. Many sectors, building and construction, hospitality industry, medicine industry, they are fulfilling their needs by sponsoring migrants from various countries into the employer nomination and employer sponsored visas. In fact, if you see the numbers from 2023 to 2024 itself, there was an allocation of 36,000, and now for this financial year 2024 and 2025 they have allocated 44,000 for employer sponsored itself.
Oh wow.
So there has been
Australian government in 2023-2024 would have given 36,000 employer-sponsored visas.
Yes.
Whereas now they have increased that and said that we'll give 8,000 more.
44,000. So
Oh,
that's
wow.
almost like 22% more compared to the last financial year.
Yeah.
So it clearly states that they are working towards the skill shortages and how to overcome them. And they are motivating the employers as well, that if you're looking for talents, these are the pathways that we have introduced for you. And the reason of recent changes which happened in the subclass 482, they reduced the overall work experience requirement from 2 years to 1 year. So now even someone, let's say, who's on a 485 post-study work visa and has got 1 year of full-time experience can apply for a employer-sponsored visa if they have an eligible sponsor.
Oh, okay, cool. So, and before that it was 2 years.
It was 2 years for 482, 186, 3 years.
Okay.
It is still 3 years, but there is a transition program from 482 to 186.
Okay.
If you're on a 482 for 2 years, you can transition into a 186
Got
TRT stream.
Got
So, and there is a new occupation list as well, which was a very hot topic a month ago, CSOL. So they have included 456 occupation which are directly impacted under subclass 482 and 186.
Okay, awesome. Again, this is like, I totally understand if this is too much numbers, but thank you for explaining that, because again, being in the industry, it becomes so normal. But what we want to do is just try and make it so easy to understand for everybody that it's just like even a 5-year-old can understand how the permanent residency system works. Cool. So employer-sponsored visas are on the rise. That's what government is focusing on. And even if you think about it, all this 189, 190, first thing that you need is a skill assessment.
Yes.
Right. So like first thing that Australian government checks is whether you have a skill, which is like, are you qualified in an occupation or not?
Yeah.
And only then you can apply for the permanent residency. Awesome. What are some of the common mistakes you see international students make because of which they don't get their permanent residency?
See, in terms of the most common things I would have basically experienced in the last 7-8 years that I've been working is students sometimes when they come here, they don't actually focus on researching themselves, that what is the best thing for me to do or what is the best pathway for me to select. They basically think in the direction that okay, we have to work and we have to make money for our survival and everything. But many a times the mistakes that I've seen is students are eligible to apply for an occupation basis on their undergraduate qualification. So for example, I'm a master's student. I have completed Bachelor's of Computer Science. I have 2 or 3 years of work experience back in my home country. 70 to 80% of the students who come here to study their post-graduation, sometimes they come and tell us that we didn't knew only that we can apply for our skills assessment on the basis of bachelor's. There are many occupations that a minimum bachelor's level qualification is required to apply for a skills assessment. That is the most common mistake that we have seen, or you can say misinformation as well. Many a times they are not aware about these things as well. Similar to engineering qualifications. Engineering qualifications as well, even though you have completed 4 years of undergraduate qualification from your home country, you can be eligible for a skills assessment or an occupation to apply for subclass 189, 190, 491.
Right. Okay. And these are the things that people just are not aware of.
They are not aware about it. Or there are some questions regarding work experience as well. Am I eligible to apply for an occupation just on the basis of work experience? Yes, you are eligible to apply for skills assessment on the basis of your work experience, your qualification and work experience. So there are a lot of possibilities. You have to explore those possibilities. and the person who's actually guiding you, they have to make a really good assessment on your profile.
That makes sense. And that is where sometimes you have found that, people that come to you are misguided before. That's where they have wasted a lot of time on their visa, and then either they don't have enough time or trying to figure out what to do next and stuff.
Yes.
Would you recommend someone to go for point tested visa or an employer sponsored visa?
Now, like both the visa pathways are really good if you're an international student or you're a migrant in Australia. It depends what's the objective.
Okay.
Firstly, what is your personal goal? If your personal goal is that I want to be independent, I don't want to be dependent on anyone. I know that I have the capability, I have the skills, I have good qualification in my background. I want to go for the point tested visa. I'm very confident that I can get very good scores in English and I can reach to that level of the points. I would say point tested visas are a really good option. Now, if someone is in a situation that, okay, I have work experience, I have a really good relationship with my employer, and employer is also in the need of that particular talent or skill, and I am an individual, my visa is expiring really soon, in the next 6 months, 7 months or 8 months. But due to some things, I'm not able to capture those points. It's no harm to explore options into employer sponsored visas. So basically it depends on the personal circumstances.
Right.
What stage of the application process you are currently and what is best suitable to you.
Fair enough. So in point tested visas, your reliance is a lot more on getting as high points as possible. And in employer sponsored visa, your reliance is a lot more on employer. That employer sponsors you, and then you stick around with the employer for like a couple of years, or like in the same industry and everything.
So the employer sponsored visas also have stages.
Okay.
So basically you have to be an eligible sponsor. You have to nominate the person for that particular position. Your nomination has to be approved by the Department of Home Affairs.
Okay.
And after that, you have to apply for the visa application.
Right.
So there are stages in employer sponsored as well. But yes, the employer has to be willing to basically sponsor
you. That's step one.
Yeah.
Dude, I love this. I think this is going to be the part one of many parts that we do together. But I think this was really good introduction to permanent residency, and you answered the questions really well as well. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
If people want to reach out to you or Studynash, how do they do that?
So the information in terms of reaching out and getting in touch with myself or getting in touch with the team at Studynash is available on our Instagram channel. You can just go into this bio section and fill up a form, and then Studynash team will get in touch with you.
What I'll do is I'll put a link in the description so that it's super easy for you to reach out to Kunal and our team at Studynash, so you can sort out your permanent residency as well. Last thoughts for anybody who wants their permanent residency, what would be your one advice to them?
Get in touch with Studynash. No, but honestly, I would strongly recommend, make sure you're doing your research even before you're completing your course. It's really good to know what is the next steps that you need to follow or that someone needs to follow. Don't think that after I get my employment, only after that I'll start working on my skills assessment or my English language examination. All these things are valid for 3 years. So I would suggest anyone who's planning for their permanent residency, start acting fast. That's the best advice, because Australian migration, its uncertainties are there, things keep on changing. Start acting the day you know the steps.
Perfect. So get to know what the steps are and act on that.
Yes.
Love that, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.